The first voice you ever hear becomes the one you carry for life. Long before you speak, you listen, and what you hear becomes the soundtrack of who you believe you are. Some voices teach love, some voices teach fear, some teach obedience, some teach that love must be earned through performance. Some voices teach you to stay quiet when you want to speak. Some teach you that tears are weakness. Some teach you that you must never fail. The collection of behaviors, thoughts, and feelings we copied from our caregivers. And if you hear them often enough, you begin to mistake them for your own. It's not just what they said, it's how they made us feel. And that feeling? It becomes the voice in our head, the one that never shuts up, the one that tells us who we are. This is a story about how we learn to love and lead, starting from the voices that raised us, the critical parent who judges, the nurturing parent who supports, and somewhere between them, the adult trying to make sense of it all. I was 10 years old, standing at the edge of the community pool. All the other kids were jumping in, having fun. And my cousin's voice cut through the air. "Look at those skinny legs, like chicken bones." The laughter that followed burned deeper than the sun. That day, I made a decision that would follow me for decades. I stopped wearing shorts, even in sweltering heat, even when it made no sense, because the voice that mocked my legs had moved inside my head. But it wasn't just the pool. At school, Mrs. Patterson stood over my desk as I struggled with handwriting. "This is dreadful," she said, loud enough for the whole class to hear. "Your writing looks like a spider fell in the ink pot. Start again, and this time, do it properly." The shame burned hotter than anger. 26 other children watching me fail, learning that I was the one who couldn't do simple things right. Family members would mock everything about me. "Look at those skinny legs. The wind's going to blow you away." They'd laugh until I cried, then mock me for crying. "Why are you crying for nothing? You cry too much." Every emotion became evidence of weakness. Every struggle became proof that I wasn't good enough. Maybe you have your own chicken bones moment. Something someone said when you were vulnerable that carved itself into how you see yourself. What do you avoid doing because of words that were meant to wound? What parts of yourself do you keep hidden because someone once made you feel ashamed of who you naturally were? By the time I was a teenager, I didn't need Mrs. Patterson anymore. I'd memorized her. Couldn't read aloud without stumbling. "You're stupid." You couldn't spell common words. "Everyone else can do this." Didn't understand what the teacher explained? "You're too slow, too thick, too broken to ever succeed." This voice followed me everywhere. It followed me to university, where I would sit at 2 a.m. stabbing my pen into notebooks because I couldn't understand concepts that seemed obvious to everyone else. It followed me into relationships, where I would sabotage good things because the voice insisted I didn't deserve them. It followed me into work, where I would stay silent in meetings because the voice convinced me that any contribution I made would expose my inadequacy. 32 years old, university library, 2 a.m. Stabbing my pen into the notebook over and over. I'd been reading the same paragraph for an hour, unable to understand, unable to believe I belonged somewhere everyone else seemed to grasp concepts that remained mysterious to me. In psychology, they call this the critical parent, the collection of harsh judgments and impossible standards we absorb from authority figures. But to me, it was just reality, the truth about who I was, the voice of wisdom, keeping me humble, keeping me realistic about my limitations. The awakening came slowly, through therapy, through reading about something called Transactional Analysis, through discovering that the voice in my head wasn't my voice at all. It was an echo of people who had been hurt themselves. That Mrs. Patterson, who destroyed my confidence, had probably been destroyed by someone else. That my cousins, who mocked my sensitivity, had learned that love came with conditions and cruelty. I learned that every person carries 3 voices inside them. The parent, which can be critical or nurturing. The adult, which observes and chooses. And the child, which feels and responds. For 30 years, I had been dominated by critical parent messages planted by people who didn't know better. But I had choice. I could nurture a different voice. The nurturing parent voice says things like, "You're learning, and that's enough." Mistakes are how we grow. You're valuable exactly as you are. It took practice to find this voice, to trust it, to let it speak louder than the criticism I'd carried for decades. I was 35 years old, sitting at my kitchen table, trying to help my 7-year-old daughter with her spelling. She was struggling with the word beautiful, sounding it out slowly, getting frustrated. And I felt this voice rising in my throat, the same voice that had torn me apart as a child. For goodness sake, it's not that difficult. You should know this by now. But I caught it, took a breath, and I watched her shoulders relax, her face soften. And I realized something that changed everything about how I understood myself. There were two voices living in my head. The voice that had been planted there by harsh teachers and impatient adults, and the voice I was choosing to cultivate, the voice that healed instead of harmed. When do you hear your parents' criticism coming out of your mouth? What would change if you paused before speaking and chose the nurturing parent instead of repeating the harsh voice that shaped you? This work isn't finished. Some days the old voice still wins. I still catch myself being harsh about mistakes that deserve compassion. Still notice the critical parent trying to take control when I'm stressed or scared. But now I recognize it as a visitor, not a resident. As an old pattern, not an eternal truth. When I make an error at work, instead of thinking, "You're such an idiot," I try to think, "That's a learning moment." When I struggle with something new, instead of, "You should know this by now," I try, "You're growing, and growth takes time." When I feel inadequate, instead of, "You're not good enough," I try, "You're exactly where you need to be right now." It is the quiet recognition that the voice in your head is not your enemy. It is your inheritance. But inheritance can be updated. Scripts can be rewritten. The voice that wounded you doesn't have to be the voice that runs you. The voice that raised you doesn't have to be the voice that runs you. You have a choice. Every day, in every interaction with yourself and others, you can choose which voice to amplify. The critical parent that tears down, or the nurturing parent that builds up. The voice of impossible standards, or the voice of unconditional worth. The voice that wounded you, or the voice that heals. It takes practice. It takes consciousness. It takes the courage to speak to yourself with the same kindness you would offer a beloved child. But it's possible, and it changes everything. Not just for you, but for everyone whose life you touch. Because voices, like wounds, are passed down through generations until someone chooses to break the chain. Thanks for watching. If this resonated with you, please subscribe for more.